Thank you for joining me for this Lifeway study of the Gospel of Mark. This is session 9. The title of the lesson is Clears, and the text is Mark chapter 11, verse 15 to 25. The lesson summary statement is Jesus expects his followers to remove obstacles to prayer. I'm going to start the class with an experience I had this past week in being in a convenience store, and a lady tried to steal like 24 two cases of Bic lighters, and the owner-manager caught her, and this happened right as I was trying to leave, and they were in front of me, and this conflict took place, and he was telling her to put the things back. She wouldn't do it, and so he slapped all of those lighters out of her hands, and I guess 24 of them just scattered all over the floor. Well, you could imagine he had and she had the attention of the entire store, and I was standing there in the middle of this, watching all this take place, and they had some things to say to one another that I obviously can't repeat to you. But that is the scene that's taking place in church there at the temple. Whatever was happening was in that temple would come to a stop, and all eyes were on the conflict. This is the text we're looking at. Now, preceding this, we have the triumphant entry on Palm Sunday, and Jesus goes and looks the temple over, and then he leaves and he returns to Bethany to stay with friends. And then on Monday, Jesus is returning to Jerusalem, and he passes by this fig tree. It has no fruit on it, and he curses the fig tree. Now, this is called a Markian sandwich. We've seen it before in Mark's gospel, and that is, there is an incident that begins the story like a parenthesis, and then there's something in the middle, and then we return to the story again. And so we have Jesus cursing the fig tree, we have the event of Jesus cleansing the temple, and then we have the next day them returning to Jerusalem and the fig tree having withered from the roots. And this is Mark's way of saying that we're to interpret what's in the middle by what has happened on each of the ends of that story. And we see something here about faith and prayer. Now, what's Mark saying about discipleship? It's an emphasis on prayer that he's going to be driving at, and that there is nothing that will be achieved in discipleship without prayer. Mark signals this at the beginning of his gospel in chapter 1, verse 35, and I'm going to ask someone to read that. And then also in the middle of his gospel in chapter 6, verse 46, another statement on prayer. And then, of course, in chapter 14, verse 32 to 40. So all throughout Mark's gospel, there's this emphasis on prayer and Jesus being a person of prayer. Nothing in discipleship is going to be accomplished without prayer. If you're going to be a follower of Jesus, you're going to be a person of prayer. The way to God is by faith and prayer, not by the temple. This is what Mark is wanting to convey to the people. Therefore, Jesus expects his followers to remove obstacles to prayer. Now, our first point is the word zealous. And it's Mark chapter 11, verse 15 to 17. And I'll read the text and just make a few comments about the text, just to kind of give it a little bit more understanding to help them visualize what is taking place. And then I'm going to have the class explain to me these various things. The class that I teach is a well-informed Bible class. They're people many of them who've been in Sunday school for years, and so they'll understand these things. And instead of me telling them things they already know, I'm wanting to draw out from them the various things that these means. For example, the money changers. What's that all about? And and selling doves. What's that about? And then I'm going to use the diagram that's provided of the temple and just talk them through and help them see the scene and the picture where this is taking place in the court of the Gentiles. The court of the Gentiles is absolutely huge. It's like 500 yards wide and 300 50 yards deep. It's a huge place, and this is taking place in this scene. And then I want them, after we've gotten an understanding of the text, I want to ask them the question that is in their personal study guide on page 86. And again, it's another opportunity to draw them back to the personal study guide, to encourage them to read it and prepare for the lesson. And the question is, how do the things that keep people from worshiping God today compare to the merchants that Jesus removed? In other words, it's a good thing. It may even be a necessary thing, but it's improper. It's gone too far. And so I'm wanting them to give me some examples like that. For example, one of the things happened to be people's schedules. That's what I'm wanting to help them see. I may even give them as an example for them to think of other things. But no time for meals. As a family, their schedules are so hectic that there's no time for family prayer or time for Bible reading. And so what is it that's imposing upon those things? And it would be things like, for younger families, their children are involved in sports and all kinds of activities. Maybe for middle-aged people, it's their jobs are more demanding. They're in have more responsibilities, or maybe it's a hobby that they're deeply interested in and enjoy, and yet it crosses the barrier to being improper. It's just simply gone too far. Zeal for God is needed to sweep away the complacency and to make changes. I found an article on zeal by J.C. Riles. I found it on the website Gospel Project, and I'm going to give this copy to the class, and then I just want to read through it because it's talking about how zeal prompts us to pray. It's very well written. It says many things that you would want to say in your class. And so that's how I'm going to bring that particular point to a conclusion. The next point is jealous. Again, I will read the text and make any comments about the text that I think would be helpful to them in understanding. And then I'm going to point out this is the definition that I found for jealousy. This statement says, although many people consider envy and jealousy synonymous, they actually have distinct meanings. Envy is the painful feeling of wanting what someone else has, like attributes or possessions. If you're jealous, you feel threatened, protective, or fearful of losing one's position or situation to someone else. And that's a perfect description of the high priest and the scribes and the way that they feel about Jesus. So I'm going to ask, can you give an example of jealousy? What would an example of that would be like? An example of envy would be, I wish I were tall and good looking. An example of jealousy is, my wife is attracted to that tall and good looking guy. There's a protective nature to it. So what are the Pharisees threatened of losing? And there are a number of things that you could say. Their notoriety, their position, their power, their success, their wealth, just a number of things that the Pharisees feel threatened by. And it's their jealousy that blinds them to Jesus. So what are they not seeing? Because they feel threatened, because they're protective of these things, jealousy is blinding them to who Jesus is. So what is it that they're not seeing that if they truly understood and saw, they would not be jealous? And of course, the things I'm thinking of is standing there in front of them is their Messiah, the very one they have been expecting. Standing in front of them is the one who's come to redeem them of their sin. Standing in front of them is the truth. Standing in front of them is pure love. Here's the one that's going to give them peace that passes understanding. Look how much they're missing out on because of their jealousy. They are allowing jealousy to silence the voice of Jesus to them. There's a tract that was called My Heart, Christ's Home. It had a very interesting concept to it. It's the picture of a person who invites Jesus into their life, and Jesus comes into their life, and then Jesus begins to go into the various rooms of their house, and the house represents their heart. And as he would go into various rooms, Jesus would confront them about various things in that room. For example, they might go into the living room, and Jesus might confront them about their entertainment, the nature of it, and the quality of it, the righteousness of it. And he would go into different rooms. And as the story goes, he comes to one particular closet, and it's locked. And he asks for the key. And this person is resistant to the key, and giving Jesus the key. And Jesus basically says, if I can't have access to that room, I can't have access to any of the house. It's a very powerful story. Well, I made a copy of a house plan, a very simple house, just with 2 bedrooms, and I'm going to give a copy of that to the class. And I just want to walk through that diagram of a house and just say, now, when you come here to the living room, what is it that it takes place in that room? And there's things like entertainment and family gatherings and hosting other people and having parties and all kinds of things of that nature. And then I'm wanting to ask the question, is there anything that is an obstacle in that room to you having an effective prayer life with Jesus? And then we might move to the kitchen, and what happens in this room? And then we'd ask the question, is there anything in that room that is an obstacle to you having an effective prayer life with Jesus? And if you want, you can go through the rest of the rooms, or you can say, you catch the idea, and so I want you to take this as an assignment this week. Think through the various rooms of your house, and it represents your life, and what is in there that you've been resistant, or you've been hiding, or you've been excusing, that is an obstacle to you having an effective prayer life. Does Jesus have the authority, or is he being silenced? Are you relating to that issue like a Christian? So could that be hindering your life, your prayer life with Jesus? Now, the third point is miraculous. Chapter 11, verse 20 to 25, and there is just a powerful text here. And in this text, I'm going to break it up. First of all, I'm going to read verses 20 to 21, and just then talk with them. What's the meaning of the withered fig tree? And the basic idea there, and you'll see this as you've studied, is the fig tree is often a representation of Israel. And in the Israel of Jesus' day gave the appearance of life and usefulness, just like the fig tree that was in leaf. And yet, when Jesus examined it, there was no fruit. And so the religious leaders and the temple worship were actually empty and barren when it came to genuinely worshiping the living God. And so I want to set that scene first, because that prepares us for verse 22 to 24. And so I'll read verse 22 to 24 with those verses about the fig tree in mind. And then I'm going to ask them, give me your response to this story. And I found a story, it's called Faith in Faith, or Faith in God. And it's at equip.org, and the title of it is Faith in Faith, or Faith in God. And it's the story about a couple who believed that name it and claim it, and their son was diabetic, and they stopped giving the son diabetic medicine, and with the intention that they were just laying claim to the fact that God was going to heal the child, and the child died. And even a week after the child died and was buried, they were still praying for him to be resurrected from the grave. And the conclusion of the story is the parents were charged and convicted by the state for child abuse. And so it put into conflict this issue of faith. Didn't we have enough faith to heal? And I want to talk about that because that is something that is out there that is so damaging and hurtful to people. And I want to talk about how this passage addresses that. And what I want them to notice is in verse 22, it says, Jesus replied to them, have faith, now notice this, in God. It's not faith in faith. It's not faith directed towards me. How much faith can I have in order to twist God's arm to do something? But my faith is to be in a person. The fundamental nature of faith is confidence in a person. And that person is the one that sets the limits and the guidelines on what we have faith in and what faith is appropriate. Jesus said, follow me. And so faith is to be in a person. Now, all Christians have doubts, but we are to examine those doubts in the light of what we know about Jesus. And then in understanding that, we are to follow Jesus. Next, Jesus ties faith in prayer to forgiveness, verse 25. And the thing I'm wanting to stress to the class when we study this is that forgiveness of sin is essential for us to be able to approach God. Without forgiveness of sin, we cannot come into the presence of a holy God. So forgiveness of sin is just the atmosphere in which we are to pray. And if a person prays, but he's not willing to forgive, the very atmosphere, the very approach that he has to God is cut short and disrupted. And so the scriptures are very consistent that we are to be forgiving. The Lord's Prayer is one of those examples of that. Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 6, talks about us having a forgiving spirit. And so this issue of an unforgiving spirit disrupts our relationship with God. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7 says that if a man relates to his wife in such a way that he harms her, in terms of wounds her spirit, that he has hindered his prayers. And the picture is of an axe laid to the root. And so relationships are vital in us having an effective prayer life. Now to close the lesson, I'm going to ask the class, suppose someone comes to you and they ask you, how can I make prayer a daily part of my life? How can I overcome obstacles to pray? How would you answer that person? What are some of the things that you would say? And I just want to start listing those on the board. And let me just give you 8 that I listed off quickly as I thought of an answer to that prayer. Set a time to pray. Do you have a time to pray? If you don't set an appointment, you don't often meet that on a consistent basis. Read about prayer. When I've read books on prayer, it stimulates me to pray. Find a method that works for you. Ask God to give you the desire to pray. That's certainly within His will, something He wants to do. Number 5, get a partner. All life change ultimately has somebody that you're accountable to. Number 6, write out your prayers to help you concentrate. If you have trouble mind wandering, write out your prayers. Number 7, make you a list. Have a prayer list. I'm going to pray on these things on Monday, these things on Tuesday, and so forth. And number 8, put a prompt on your phone. Just something that reminds you to pray. I pray for our church members on Tuesday and Thursday, a family member. I send a letter to them and tell them on Tuesday I'm going to be praying for you, or on Thursday I'll be praying for you. And I have a prompt on my phone that goes off, an alarm that reminds me, yes, you're supposed to be praying for this church member on Tuesday or on Thursday. So maybe you could use something like that. But there are some ways in which you could do that. And I'm sure your class has some very creative ideas that would help overcome obstacles to praying. Brothers and sisters, teaching this lesson, you have the opportunity to bring great blessings to your class. to the people who are in your class. Imagine this. You're helping them understand that they actually have access to the Creator of the universe. And when you understand that, why would you not take advantage of that every single day? What a wonderful lesson and a privilege to teach God's people this lesson. Thank you so much. I hope this is helpful to you. God bless.